All right, so there we go. So, what I want to do then is um, share some of my experiences. We talk about America and the Holocaust, and uh, I first became aware of the issue of Nazi war criminals in the United States while I was a student at Yeshiva Chavetz Chaim in New York in 1964. I was a high school student. I was 17. So I'm in New York. It's 1964. I'm in high school. I know really nothing about the horrors of the Holocaust, but newspapers headlined a story about this woman who lived around the corner, Hermine Braunsteiner Ryan, uh, was accused of being a vice commandant at Medina concentration camp and of having been involved in the murder of untold numbers of inmates. Simon Wiesenthal, the famous Nazi hunter, had been credited with uncovering her identity. She had married this Marine after the war, Ryan, it was his name, Saving Sergeant Ryan. This was a Sergeant Ryan. They met, she married him, came back to the United States. And this was a lovely little suburb in New York called Kew Gardens, and she had this little house with a garden and everything, and there were houses all around. I mean, it was so it was a small neighborhood where everybody knew everybody's neighbors. In 1968, the Justice Department, so 64, she was discovered by Simon Wiesenthal, who said, this is a person who was a terrible Nazi war criminal, and she's living peacefully in the United States. In 1968, the Justice Department begrudgingly moved to deport her. Deportation proceedings began in 1972. You see, she lied when she came into the United States. American law said that you couldn't come in as a refugee and settle in the United States and become an American citizen if you had been a Nazi war criminal. And she said, no, I never did anything. So now that it's uncovered, so now she lied, and they're going to strip her of her American citizenship and send her back to Germany to stand trial. So 64, now 68, now it's 1972, where the deportation proceedings began. The case received unusual press coverage for a deportation proceeding because it represented the first attempt on the part of the Justice Department to deport an American resident on grounds pertaining to war crimes. I'd like to read you a bit of the testimony. See, this is all happening there. So there's a proceeding, and they have witnesses. And this is the testimony of Jacob Corman, as recorded by Dorothy Rabinowitz in her book, New Lives. How many times had he seen people killed in Medina? The prosecutor asked the witness. Every day is the answer. Medina was a death camp. But this particular time is one he cannot get out of his head. One day, he and the other prisoners hauled the food rations to the women's camp as usual, but they were not permitted to enter because 300 or 400 women were assembled in front of the entrance. The women, most of them were little children, had just arrived in Medina, where Hermine Braunsteiner was now talking to them. And she said to them that they had to give up the children to the people in the wagons. They're going to a summer camp, and they would get milk in the morning and at evening. But the mothers held on and wouldn't let go and wouldn't give up the children, little ones, 2, 3, 4 years old. A second time, Braunsteiner told the mothers that they must give up the children, and when they would not let go of the children, this time, Braunsteiner began to beat an old woman holding a child of about 2 in her arms. The old woman was not the mother of the child she held in her arms, but its protector. And Braunsteiner hit the old woman again and again, and then both the woman and the child were on the ground. Afterwards, he and the other prisoners had to carry away the corpses. And then there continued this scene that he could not forget himself, and that other prisoners he and the other prisoners hauling the food wagons in, the screams and cries as the SS fell upon the women and the children, the sight of the children being carried to the trucks, and the truckloads of terrified children driving away, everyone knowing where they were going. Her neighbors testified that she was a very nice woman and that she'd been through enough and that she should be allowed to stay in America. And the prosecutors asked each of these neighbors one question: does it make any difference to you whether the charges made here against the defendant are true or not? And they uniformly answered, no, we should forgive and forget. This woman was deported to Germany in 1973 and there put on trial for her crimes. I was in Germany in 1978 doing research on the connections between the American and German eugenics movement. And I read in the local newspapers that she was still on trial. Finally, in 1981, after a trial that had lasted 5.5 years, she was sentenced to serve life in prison. She was 61 years old when she was finally convicted for the heinous crimes that she had committed. She had been tried 3 times. The trial process alone took over a decade. And in 1981, when she was finally convicted, she was still the only Nazi war criminal ever deported from the United States. My first response was rage. You know, I mean, I was in such a rage when I began to learn this stuff. And, you know, and I wanted vengeance. I didn't want justice. I wanted vengeance. I was so angry that this could have happened. It takes a long time to get over that rage. And I understand that because when I was in Israel, you know, I met Palestinians who have the same rage, and I understand it perfectly. You know, you had the first reaction to these kinds of crimes against your own people is rage, anger, and you don't know what to do with it. Valerian Trifa, the Archbishop of the Romanian Orthodox Church in America and Canada, lived on a large estate outside of Detroit in what's it called? Grass Lake, Michigan. You can look on it on Google Maps. It's isolated. It's really out away from the city, but it's this huge complex that the Romanian Orthodox Church owns, and he was the Archbishop of the church. So I want to tell you a story about a butcher who became a bishop. On Wednesday, 11th of May, 1955, Valerian Trifa, Bishop of the Romanian Orthodox Church in America, offered the opening prayers before the US Senate. Almighty God, he said, who has made America trustee of priceless human liberty and dignity, look down from heaven upon thy servants present before thee, and bless them that they may remember in their discussions and decisions Romania and all the oppressed nationals who are still longing for a government by the people, for the people. Bishop Trifa, a close friend of J. Edgar Hoover, had been invited to open the Senate proceedings by then Vice President Richard Nixon. Valerian Trifa had not always been a priest. In fact, until the time of his ordination, shortly after his appointment as the bishop in 1952, he had not so much as served as an altar boy. Valerian Trifa was a butcher by profession. See, in January of 1941, Trifa was leader of the Romanian Iron Guard, and he supervised the destruction of Romanian jewelry. In one program, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency had this report to make. This is January 29th, 1941, newspaper article in the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. Quote, perhaps the most horrifying single episode of the program last Wednesday was the kosher butchering of almost 200 Jews at the municipal slaughterhouse. The Jews who had been rounded up after several hours of Iron Guard raids were put into trucks and carried off to the slaughterhouse. And there, where they were led to the chopping blocks, where their throats were cut in a horrible parody of the traditional Jewish method of slaughter. The bodies were then hung on iron meat hooks and stamped kosher meat. The man who led this butchery lived comfortably on a 400-acre estate outside of Detroit until a few years ago, when he was deported to Portugal, where he had found temporary refuge. He was finally tried and convicted. Bishop Trifa had first met Nixon while trying to help a fellow Romanian, Nicolae Malaxa. Malaxa was one of the wealthiest industrialists in Eastern Europe. He was a billionaire, that's it. And he wanted to come to America. His entry was being blocked by the US immigration officials, who had evidence that Malaxa was the chief finance supporter for the Iron Guard, which was a neo-Nazi organization. They worked with the Nazis, they rounded up Jews, they were part of the extermination process. In May 1951, at the height of the Korean War, Malaxa organized the Western Tube Corporation. The company would produce valuable war materials. Its headquarters in Whittier, California, was the law office of then the junior senator from California, Richard Nixon. So Malaxa's office in California was the lawyer Richard Nixon's office in Whittier, California. Nixon was arranging for Malaxa to be able to come here. Nixon requested the INS to ignore the war crimes allegations and give Malaxa first preference to enter the United States, since he was indispensable to the operation of Western Tube. We're in the Vietnam War. This is going to be important for us. So come on, let the guy in. The petition was successful, and Malaxa entered the U.S. as a permanent resident. Nothing further was ever heard of Western Tube. Instead, Malaxa kept himself busy reclaiming millions of dollars of capital which had been confiscated during the war as enemy assets. Malaxa had numerous complex legal problems, but he solved them all with the best justice that money could buy. He hired not only Nixon's law firm, but the law firm of Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, the law firm of the Secretary of the Treasury John Paley, and the law firm of the Secretary of the Air Force T.K. Finletter. Hire enough lawyers, and it doesn't matter what the crime was. Now consider this. In December 1941, 769 Jews had successfully escaped the grip of Valerian Trifa's Iron Guard and were safely aboard the Struma, a boat, a rickety old boat sailing for Palestine. They soon reached Turkey and apparent safety when the boat's engines broke down. For 2 months, the refugees waited off Istanbul, their fate in the balance. The Turkish government refused to let them land unless the British would give assurances that the Jews would be allowed to leave for Palestine. The British refused any such assurances, not wanting to disturb Arab sentiment in Palestine. So the Turks towed the disabled ship out to sea, where it was either torpedoed or hit a mine. We're not sure. Only one person survived. Shortly after the German defeat, the War Department set up a program known as Project Paperclip, which was designed to exploit German and Austrian experts in rocketry, aircraft design, aviation medicine, and other fields. Under this secret project, Nazi scientists brought to the US under military custody to be exploited for US advantage. They included experts on the V-2 missiles, including Wernher von Braun, aircraft design, wind tunnels, and other fields. The idea was to use their skills temporarily and then to deport them back to Germany. But American intelligence agents soon began doctoring records of scientists who had committed crimes in order to give them permanent jobs in US defense industries. So, I mean, if someone could be very useful to us, for example, Arthur Rudolph. Arthur Rudolph was brought to the United States. He lived in the United States. He was an honored citizen of the United States. He is known as the father of space medicine. This is the guy who designed John Glenn's moon suit. He was way ahead. Why was he way ahead? Because in the 1940s, he could experiment on human beings At Dachau concentration camp, they had a high altitude chamber. This was a chamber, metal chamber, and you could simulate high altitudes, 30,000, 40,000 feet, where you can't normally live, where your lungs explode, and so they would put people into these high altitude chambers. They would bring them up to a point where they died. They'd pull them out. They would do autopsies. So Arthur Rudolph was doing really important research that helped him develop the first spacesuit that John Glenn used to go to the moon. So US intelligence didn't want to just suck the guy dry, and then send him back to Germany. No, we wanted him to be able to settle permanently in the United States and to work at NASA and to become head of NASA's, Space Medicine Institute, and to be an honored American. So in order to do that, they had to doctor the records. Among those contracted under Paperclip were several defendants in the Nuremberg war crimes trial, called Brandt. These trials involved 23 defendants who were charged with participation in gruesome medical experiments on prisoners at Dachau, Buchenwald, and other concentration camps. Among the defendants were 4 men who worked for the US military: Hermann Becker-Freising, Siegfried Ruff, Konrad Schäfer, and Kurt Blum. These men had experimented on human beings in specially built high-altitude chambers, as well as testing how long inmates could survive on specially treated seawater, or how long a man could survive in freezing water. German pilots were being shot down. They went into the Atlantic. The water is freezing. So they were doing experiments. You take a concentration camp inmate, you throw him into freezing water, and you wait until the very last minute, and you pull him out, and you see, what's the best way to thaw the guy out. Kurt Blum was a biologist who specialized in biological warfare. He had been charged with participation in the German euthanasia program, extermination of tubercular Poles, biological warfare, and other experiments on human beings. The US Army Chemical Corps wanted to use his biological warfare expertise. Blum admitted to American agents that SS Chief Heinrich Himmler had ordered him in 1943 to conduct plague vaccine experiments on concentration camp inmates. At the same time, that is, he was giving them plague. At the same time, his interrogation, he was at the time of his interrogation, he was a major general in the SA, and as a result of the evidence withheld by the Americans, Blum was acquitted at Nuremberg, and they were looking for the evidence, and we had it, and we held it back. So this guy got off. He should have been hanged. In November 1947. He was interviewed by 4 members of the Camp Detrick, Maryland, about his work on biological warfare. And in August 1951, he signed a contract to work for the Army Chemical Corps under Project 63. At about this time, the newly organized CIA began to work on Project Artichoke, later called MK Delta and MK Ultra. This was a top secret program to investigate chemical and other means of behavior modification. The CIA contracted for research with hundreds of American professors, psychiatrists, doctors, and government officials for research in these areas. They had contracts with major drug companies. If a company was testing a drug, say for some liver condition, and the drug turned out to be useless for the liver because it caused severe migraine headaches, the CIA wanted to know of the drug, not for its effect on the liver, but for its adverse side effects. They wanted to have a whole set of drugs that could make you nauseous and migraine and feel like you're dying and all these other things. So they were contracting with pharmaceutical companies and doctors and psychiatrists who were all testing these kinds of things, reporting back to the CIA so that the CIA could build up their own chemical arsenal. MK Ultra was the research end of this project. MK Delta was the field testing of these behavior modification experiments. The CIA was looking, as one 1953 document puts it, for a person's breaking point. As part of this research, CIA behavior modification techniques were tried out on numerous subjects. Admiral Turner told the Senate Investigation Committee in the 1970s that some of the persons chosen for the experiments were drug addicts and alcoholics. He failed to report that MK Ultra research was carried out in many American universities and that prisoners in American prisons were used as human guinea pigs. We also found out later that soldiers were also used as human guinea pigs. These revelations emanated from a Rockefeller Commission report of 1975, which investigated the bizarre death of Frank Olson, CIA operative. CIA operatives had put LSD in Olson's coffee. So, in 1975, nobody heard of LSD. It was the CIA was working on it, and Frank Olson was one of these guys who like had a stick up his ass, was like really stiff kind of person. And the guys in the office thought, hey, wouldn't it be something if we put some acid in his coffee? Yeah, let's try that. Let's put some acid in Frank's coffee. They put acid in Frank's coffee, and he became totally paranoid. He thought that people had drugged him. And they kept saying, no, he got out of control. They ran him up to New York. They were going to take him to a CIA mental health facility in Connecticut. And while he was in New York, he jumped out of the window of his 24th floor hotel room and smattered on the floor down below. The CIA went to his family and told Frank's 2 young daughters that their daddy had committed suicide. He said he had been acting very strangely lately. We only discovered this because this thing started an investigation. People want to know, what the hell happened? What do you mean? He jumped out of you, taking him to what, all of a sudden, overnight, he's crazy? John Marks, who led the investigation into the MKUltra project, said in a press conference in Washington, D.C. in the early 70s, this research project is a potential threat to our most basic freedoms if it gives the government or anyone else the ability to manipulate human behavior in this way. These techniques do not just smack of 1984, they open the prospect of totalitarian control. In 1944, during the last month of the war, the SS became determined to wipe out the last Jew. But time was against them. Because the Allies were closing in, they were losing the war, so they decided to speed up the process. Up to this point, women who arrived at the camp with children were separated from their mothers. The children were gassed immediately since they had no labor value, but the mothers could still have labor value and they could be worked to death first. When they could no longer work, then they were gassed. But in the summer of 1944, it was decided that mothers with small children were to go straight to the crematoria and to be gassed immediately with their children. This was done to avoid delays that resulted from tearing children from their mothers. You saw the scene in front of Medina. It got messy. It got very, and you didn't want it, you wanted everything to be smooth. In 1944, you're losing the war. You want to finish this job and kill every last Jew. And now here's the testimony at the Nuremberg trial. The prosecutor is asking a guard, a witness, a woman. Witness, women carrying children were sent with them to the crematoria. The children were then torn from their parents outside the crematorium and sent to the gas chambers separately. At that point, crowding in more people, you could toss the children in over the heads of the adults and you could squeeze in a few more people. Separating meant that more children could be packed in separately, or they could be thrown in over the heads of the adults to the chamber. When the exterminations of the Jews in the gas chambers was at its height, however, orders were issued that children were to be thrown straight into the crematoria furnaces or into a pit near the crematorium without being gassed first. See, at the end, it was so crazy. They just dug a hole. They dug a pit. They threw some logs, wood in it, gasoline, started a fire. Now they have a pit of a fire. And then instead of trying to get these children, throw them into the gas chamber, forget it, just throw them straight into the fire. The prosecutor asked, how am I to understand this? Did they throw them into the fire alive or did they kill them first? Witness, they threw the bit alive. Their screams could be heard throughout the camp. It is difficult to say how many children were destroyed in this way. The prosecutor, why did they do this? Witness, it's difficult to say. We don't know whether they wanted to economize on gas or if it was because there was not enough room in the gas chambers. What does it mean to economize on gas? The Nazis kept records. They were very careful. We have the records from the SA. The gas was produced by Degesche Mehler Chemical Corporation, a subsidiary of IG Farben. Zyklon B, the gas used at Auschwitz, cost 5 marks per kilogram. Approximately 5.5 kilograms were used on every chamber load of about 1,500 Jews. This meant that 27.5 marks per 1,500, with a mark at about 25 cents at the time, this yields $6.75 to kill 1,500 people, or 45/100ths of a cent per person. In the summer of 1944, the SS was unwilling to spend 2/5 of a cent to put a child out of its misery before you threw it into the burning flames. Now consider this. In 1944, during the final Saturnalia of destruction, when 15,000 people a day were being gassed at Auschwitz, Jewish groups around the world were clamoring for the destruction of the death camps. In the United States, the World Jewish Congress, the Secretary of Treasury Henry Morgenthau approached the War Department through War Refugee Board and requested that Auschwitz facilities be bombed. After considering the request, John J. McCloy, the Assistant Secretary of War, issued the following statement. The War Department has been approached by the War Refugees Board, which has raised the question of the practicality of this suggestion. After a study, it became apparent that such an operation could be executed only by the diversion of considerable air support, essential to the success of our forces now engaged in decisive operations elsewhere, and would in any case be of such doubtful efficacy that it would not warrant the use of our resources. There has been considerable opinion to the effect that such an operation, even if practicable, might provoke even more vindictive action by the Germans. They were killing 15,000 people a day in these gas chambers. And if you destroy the gas chambers, that might make the Germans really mad. And that might spur them to even more vindictive action. It's hard to imagine what might be more vindictive than the slaughter of 15,000 innocent people a day. Be that as it may, that statement was issued August 14th, 1944. 6 days later, on Sunday, August the 20th, 1944, 127 flying fortresses, escorted by 100 Mustang fighters, dropped 1,360 36 500-pound high explosive bombs on the synthetic and rubber factories at Auschwitz. The planes came within 5 miles of the gas chambers. In fact, on a clear July day, the 15th Air Force Division turned it to its primary attention to destroying the German synthetic fuel industry around Auschwitz. The crematoria had these giant smokestacks. They were easy to see. It was hard to understand how they missed them. But of course, it was never one of the targets. The crematoria could easily be seen from the air since they were equipped with 2 smokestacks that rose 340 feet in the air. It's hard to understand how our bombers missed the gas chambers. Of course, it was no accident. Each bombing mission was given a specific set of targets. The gas chambers were never among them. Had our bombers bothered to destroy the gas chambers in July or August, the Nazis would not have been able to be more vindictive. They wouldn't have been able to rebuild it. John J. McCloy, the man in charge of these bombing operations, also was in charge of the building of the concentration camps in the United States for the Japanese. In 1973, he was representative of 4 major, I love these guys always, not only they get off, but they have these fabulous careers afterwards. You know, even the Nazi war criminals. You have the Bishop Trifa living on a 400-acre estate, you know, leading the Senate in prayers. You know, just his friend Malaksa billions of dollars, that he managed to get released from American banks that had been confiscated because of his wartime activities. John J. McCloy was in 1973 represented 4 major oil companies. And within days of the beginning of the Yom Kippur War, McCloy was at the White House urging Nixon not to rearm the Israelis. McCloy had also served as president of Chase Manhattan Bank and the board of the Ford Foundation and one of the first presidents of the World Bank. I mean, he was an incredible guy. So I was at Washington University working on my PhD, which I never got. Washington University booted me out. This is my radical days. They invited John J. McCloy to be the keynote speaker at graduation. And we organized, when he was invited up to speak, a whole group of graduates sitting there stood up, turned their back on him, and walked out. It took me a long time to lose the rage that I carried around with me. I don't have it anymore. It's all kind of burned out. But in 2015, I wasn't teaching genocide. I was teaching racism course, or teaching my regular courses. I was approached by Dean Potter, who said to me, Barry, a former Ferris student who's now a billionaire wants to give us a genocide program. He wants to donate this amazing archive, but he said, is anybody here that can run a program like that? And I said, sure, you could. I didn't have really very much choice. You know what I mean? I mean, it says, this guy was going to, and potentially could give us millions and millions of dollars. I mean, he says, this is a man who in 1 year gave $10 million to Beaumont Hospital in Detroit to set up a wing of their heart thing named after his parents, the Asa and Sarah Shapiro Heart Center, right? And he built a little Jewish school at the same time, another $10 million. He's on the board of Steven Spielberg's Shoah Foundation. He's the kind of money that he can, it was just an opportunity that you can't say no to. 2 years later, so I'm almost 24/7. All I'm doing is genocide. I'm running programs to teach our faculty, and I've got a genocide course that I've worked up, and then and I'm taking groups of Ferris students to Detroit to go to the Holocaust Memorial Center, I'm 73 now. So 70 years old, and I'm just feeling really, really sick as a dog. I'm not sleeping well. I'm losing weight. I lost 10 pounds. Can't digest anything. Diarrhea all the time. I figured, all right, it's probably like a cancer or something respectable. Kathryn Woods who is teaches she's a social work teacher. She's social work, and she specializes in trauma, and especially in sexual trauma. So we were going to organize this whole thing on genocide, women, and trauma. Uh, she was one of the faculty that I trained, in the early days, and I invited her to come to my genocide class. This class that I have with you. But it was face to face then, and she rolled into the class. She's in a wheelchair, um, and uh, and by the way, if you're interested in sexual abuse for a topic, she'd be a great person to talk to, because that's what she specializes in. And she came into the classroom to talk about trauma and the effects of trauma on us, and the fact that you can have secondary trauma. I mean, the stuff that I just read to you, this stuff, it gets to you. It's not like everything else you're studying in college. This stuff is really it digs at you. So she gave this lecture, and by the time she was done, I realized that as much I've done this all my life, I thought I was bulletproof. You know what I mean? I thought, come on. I mean, I've been talking genocide for decades and decades and decades. I can do this. And it turned out that it was really more than I could do. And once I realized that it was depression and anxiety from post-traumatic stress from all this stuff. And so my doctor gave me a very mild antidepressant. Everything went away. That was it. That was it. It was all the effects of teaching this subject, because it's you have to worry about the impact. Some things is you learn. And I was so today I was on. I was talking to Ruth, and Ruth Bergman. She's a wonderful, wonderful person. She's the daughter of Holocaust survivors. I married a daughter of survivors, right? So I got to know Helen's family. And Ruth told me that she's had experiences after all the things that she's been doing, where she comes across something, an image that you can't get out of your head, and it drives you crazy, and it makes you nuts. So I want you to know that if you experience problems with this stuff, that's pretty normal. And if you need to talk to someone, I don't know whether I'm the best person to talk to, but you're certainly welcome to. But Kathryn Woods, would be a really good person. She's really concerned about this. So is Ruth. They're really concerned about, because if this is all you're doing, you're running workshops to train, and high school students, you want to be careful with what they call, they want the students to be able to come in safely and to leave safely, and not to go out, traumatized by the material. I'm not quite sure how you do that. The material is so ugly and so horrifying that I've never been able to figure out how to live my life. In other words, I think I said this to you, and I'm going to end it in a minute here. I'll open it up if you have any comments, but I don't want to carry you over. I went over half an hour, and I don't want to do that again. I don't know. I think I lost. Yes. So the last time I taught this class, I had one of the students. Her name was Jennifer. And And mom, toddler baby, took the class like as a hoot. I mean, she was graduating. So last semester, she just thought it was really interesting. She's now in graduate school studying the Holocaust. And, you know, I should be proud, right? I should be proud. You know. So what have I done to her? You know, it's like, you know, I didn't mean to send her to graduate school to study the Holocaust. I mean, you know, and I could see it happening. I mean, it says, you know, young mother, just the way I was hit when, you know, you first confront this material, and you have your when my son Isaac was born, that's when I had the nightmares. I had been doing fine, and now I have a 3-year-old son, and I'm just melting down. I'm having nightmares about my son in the future, and the Nazis are going to come and get him. And so you can understand that my son Isaac is now 36. He's a martial arts black belt, small arms fire, you know, expert, urban and wilderness rescue. You know, he's gone. You know, he's gone with his buddies, and they drop down into the woods, and one of them is pretending to be a broken leg and stuff. And you got to get the things, and you got to put him on it, and you got to drag him out. You know, that kind of thing. And then urban rescue. EMT. He's certified EMT with several subspecialties. He's a walking survival machine. You know, it's he grew up, and I remember how this happened. It was in 1994, 95. This book came out called The Bell Curve, and it was all this kind of racist stuff about, you know, African Americans being less intelligent than white people, and I was invited to be on World News Tonight, Peter Jennings' World News Tonight. You know, it was a big news show that had 25 million, you know, 25 million people watch it at night. So, so I'm going to be on this big show, and I already knew that the more exposure I had, the more dangerous it was. So this was the most danger that I'd ever exposed myself to, or my family. And my wife had been in an accident, and she was wearing a full body cast. I mean, from her whole leg, you know, she couldn't move. And they wanted to actually film it in my home. And I said, "Are you kidding? You know, it's a Molotov cocktail come through the window, you know? No, we don't come anywhere near my home. Well, we'll do it all at the university." And sure enough, after the thing aired, calls, emails, you know, I get all death threats. So my wife picks up the phone, and there's this crazy man with a crazy edge in his voice saying, "Listen, bitch, I know who you are, and I know where you live, and I'm coming for your family." So she hung up on him. I mean, he left this was a message he left on an answering machine because she hung up on him. I didn't go to the police. I wouldn't go to the police. Every time I've gone to the police, like, you know, I say, "This is a hate crime." They say, "Oh, no." You know, they painted swastikas on the mailbox that used to be on my corner. And I said, "Well, that's a hate crime." "Oh, no, it's just the kids." And look, you can see they didn't even know how to do it. They did it backwards. They did the swastika backwards. So I didn't go to the police. I went to two friends, a couple, and he was a Vietnam demolitions expert, and she was an ex-cop, and the two of them were raising Rottweiler guard dogs. And so, and they both had license to carry. Isaac was like 10. So they moved into my house, and Ron, the Marine, would take my son Isaac to school every day, pick him up and bring him home and stay with him all the time. And this was Sunday morning, and Isaac said to Ron, so I'm in the kitchen and they're in the living room, in the dining room. And so Isaac said to Ron, listen, Ron, you know, I like you, but I want to go and play with my friends in our secret fort. And, you know, I mean, it's a secret fort, you know, so really, you can't come. And he said, Isaac, there are some people who might want to harm your father. And the worst thing they could do would be to harm you. I'm here to make sure that doesn't happen. So a few years ago, it must have been 10, 15 years ago. So my son is in Hemlock Park, practicing for his black belt katas, you know, and he's going like this and he's moving all around. And a reporter for the Pioneer happens to be in the park, and they have a segment in the Pioneer, like local weirdos, you know, so, you know, people who are doing things that are interesting. And she came up to him and she asked him, you know, what are you doing, and what, you know, and how did you get into this? And he explained that many years ago, his father was on television, and the phone rang, and he picked up the phone. We had told Isaac, "Don't answer the phone," and he never told me this. I read it in a newspaper, in an interview he did with a reporter. He said that the phone rang, he answered the phone, and this guy on the other end of the phone said, I'm going to chop you up into pieces and mail you back to your father in boxes. Isaac put the phone down. And 15 years later, I learned about it. Now, he's a good kid, and he's self-employed, and, you know, couldn't ask for a better son. But it's almost like he's a victim of the Nazis, you know? I once had a dream that there had been this horrible Holocaust. And then I woke up and realized it wasn't over. That I was still chasing Nazis, and they were still threatening my family. That's all I got for you for tonight. We have a few minutes to sit and think. If you have anything you want to ask. Okay, we're at the stage now where everyone needs to be moving along on your research topic. All the topics have to be Shoah Archive. You know, in other words, whatever you do, you have to have Shoah Archive interviews to go along with your research. That's part of this. What we're doing, we're focused on the archives. So you want to have archives, and you want to, each of you have a general area, so that, for example, you know, if you're doing Asia, and you're thinking about the rape of Nanking, there's a little book. I don't know how fast people read it, but it's a paperback. It's, but there's kind of like basic things like I gave to the criminal justice group here. We have 8 criminal justice students, it's amazing. And they're all going to read Ordinary Men because that is the classic work about police. So if you should be trying to get a broad background for your paper, and also focusing on a narrow focus. And remember, papers need to be, argumentative. So you need to be trying to say something. You need to be trying to. The best way I have to describe this is: imagine you're an attorney, you're a lawyer, and you go into court, and you have a client, and you want to argue something to the jury. So the first thing you do is you go up to the jury, there's opening remarks, and you say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I intend to prove that my client is innocent. And I intend to prove that in 3 ways. That he couldn't have been there yet, the why witnesses, and and the people say he was a stand-up guy, he couldn't have, etc. And then you bring all of your witnesses, and then at the end, you summarize what it is that you proved. So argumentative paper, you've got an argument that you want to present right away in the beginning of your paper. You want to bring your evidence for your argument, and you want to summarize your argument. Right now, you want to be working to move in that direction. You're not going to have a thesis to begin with. You have a thesis at the end. Start off working on your thesis. Okay? So I think next week is going to be fun and exciting, and we're going to have something different. And I'm really, just really, really grateful that the people from the Holocaust Memorial Center can do this for us. And they said that, they're in it all the way. I mean, if you have any problems, you can just go back, you can call them, you can email them, you can, and once they are helping, they're there for you. Okay, so wow, great showing tonight. I love Wednesday night. You people are terrific. And I'm just gonna bring her to a close, and I'll load this up so that people who aren't here can at least get the material.